Here, Lee, time for breakfast. Oh, what? What that look? That's enough for the wounded, right? Daughters-in-law that don't work are like pigs, right? My mother-in-law said mockingly to me, who was unable to do housework because of a broken wrist. What she held out before me was, to my surprise, food scraps. A plate of banana peels, fish bones, coffee grounds, etc., all jumbled together. I glanced at my husband, who was pretending not to notice and eating a delicious-looking piece of boiled fish. This is just too much. When I raised my voice in protest, my husband put down his utensils and said,
Mom is right, isn't she? If you can't do the housework even though you're a housewife, you don't deserve to exist.
I was blindsided by his words. My husband and mother-in-law ignored me and resumed eating happily together. I felt miserable, and at the same time, a thought occurred to me. My name is Lee, and I will be 40 years old this year. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I used to live with my husband then, and our son, who is in 6th grade, in a rented apartment. Currently, we live with my mother-in-law at their house. When we first got married, we lived separately from my parents-in-law in close proximity. But when my father-in-law passed away last year, we started living together. This was Ben's suggestion. My mother-in-law is still very active and does not need nursing care. However, Ben thought it would be lonely to live alone in a big house, so he decided to move in with her. I didn't feel particularly bad about moving in with her. We used to go back and forth a lot before we moved in together, and since her house is in the same school district, I was in favor of moving in with her. And my parents' house is far away, but my brother and his wife live with them there, so there was no problem. Finally, we started living together. My mother-in-law was very supportive of the housework and shared it with me. My son seemed to like my mother-in-law, and I often saw them playing together. To be honest, I was relieved. I was still anxious. I wondered if we would be able to get along even though we were family. That's what I thought. However, when I opened the door, life together was going well. I was glad I took Ben's suggestion. I thought so. But it was 3 months after we started living together that I first felt a sense of discomfort. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm cooking today, so can I ask you to do the laundry? I asked in my usual tone. I'm not feeling well today. I will leave it to you. With that, my mother-in-law plopped down on the sofa and started watching a variety show. I guess there are days like that. I did as I was told and did all the chores. However, the next day and the day after that, my mother-in-law did not do any housework. In the beginning, she would say, I have to go out now. She gave various reasons, such as I'm busy with my things, but gradually, that stopped and she began to take it out on me for no reason at all. I thought it was a little strange at this point, but I did not protest strongly. Up to this point, I had been doing all the housework for 3 people by myself. Although, the addition of my mother-in-law had increased the number of household chores for 4. I did not consider it a particularly heavy burden. But I was naive. She took advantage of the fact that I didn't say anything to her, and she gradually showed her true colors. Lee, I told you to wash all my shoes, didn't I? I also told you to go sell my old clothes, and I asked you to send out my summer greeting cards to all my friends. Why didn't you finish them at all? Oh, I'm sorry. Yesterday and today, we had a parents' meeting of my son's baseball team. When I replied, my mother-in-law glared at me and became angry. Don't make excuses. Just do it now. If you don't go to bed, it will be done by the end of the day. That day was the beginning of my mother-in-law's abuse of me. I was perplexed by the drastic change in her attitude from when we first started living together. And yet, she was still the same kind and good grandmother to my son, so I didn't understand what was going on. I wondered why this had happened and decided to talk to Ben about it. But Ben said,
I think it's your fault for being so slow.
He would only say it half-jokingly. One day, after such a situation had continued, it was the day when, after a while, my son was on a school trip. The day went by quickly, as I was thinking about whether he was having a good time and whether I hoped he came back without any injuries. I was about to take a bath and go to bed when Ben called out to me.
Oh, I want some ice cream. Lee, go get me some. The one that's only available at the convenience store.
It was 11 p.m. and raining. What? If you want ice cream so bad, why don't you just go get it yourself? As I said this, Ben suddenly shouted out loud,
I told you to go! Why can't you listen to me?
I had never seen Ben yell before, so I froze in surprise and couldn't move. Then my mother-in-law came after me.
You're so cocky, even for a daughter-in-law. You should have just gone shopping like he told you.
I was so exhausted by their stares that I put on a jumper over my nightclothes and ran out of the house. It was dark outside, and the rain beat hard against my umbrella. I shrank back to avoid getting wet as much as possible and headed for the convenience store. How did this happen? The convenience store was about 10 minutes away from our house, but that was only if I rode my bicycle. It was raining, and I couldn't ride my bike, so it took longer than that. By the time I finally arrived at the convenience store, my pants were soaking wet. I bought an ice cream and left the convenience store. I can't wait to go home, and I want to take a bath again. With these thoughts in mind, I walked faster than when I first arrived. I could see my house soon. That's when it happened. I was sprayed by a car coming from behind, and I jumped in surprise. I quickly put my right hand on the ground. It was a mistake. I felt pain in my wrist like I had never experienced before. As it turned out, I had broken my right wrist. I rushed to the emergency room where I was treated and told that I had broken my right wrist. After treatment, I looked at my phone and saw that I had received a large number of calls from Ben and my mother-in-law. I rushed to call Ben. Hello, Ben. I broke my wrist. I'm at the hospital. Then, Ben opened his mouth and said, Where's the ice cream? What? Oh, ice cream? Sorry, it melted. Normally, I would have thought he would be worried by my health, but he quickly responded,
What? What that? I was looking forward to it. You can't even go shopping properly.
With that, Ben hung up the phone. I was going to ask him to pick me up. I called Ben several times after that, but he never answered. I called a cab and went home alone, half crying. When I arrived home, both my mother-in-law and Ben were already asleep and did not greet me. I wanted to talk to Ben, so I went to our bedroom. I noticed a sign on the door.
Dear Lee, do not open the door. Do not wake me,
it said. Feeling miserable, I took a shower and fell asleep alone on the living room couch. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of my mother-in-law's voice. Honey, you are disturbing me by sleeping here. Here, I made you breakfast. Go eat it. You can't do your chores anyway, can you? My mother-in-law pulled me by the arm, and I sat up. I couldn't understand what was going on, because I had just woken up from sleep. But I wondered if my mother-in-law was concerned about me in her own way. At the dining table, Ben was already there in a suit, poking a boiled fish. Here, Lee, breakfast is ready. What was presented to me was food scraps. A plate of banana peels, fish bones, coffee grounds, etc., all mixed together. Oh, what is it? What's that face? Isn't this enough for the injured? A wife who doesn't work is like a pig, right? My mother-in-law laughed at me mockingly. I glanced at my husband, who was pretending to be normal and eating some delicious-looking boiled fish. Why don't you cover for me? Why do you give me such a hard time? This is just too much. When I finally raised my voice in protest, my husband quietly put down his utensils and said,
My mother is right, isn't she? If you can't do the housework even though you're a housewife, you don't deserve to exist.
My mother-in-law and Ben looked at each other and laughed. I was stunned and unable to say anything. But Ben and my mother-in-law continued to press me. I'm not sure if she had broken a bone in the first place. That's why I don't like young women these days.
Yes, that's right. And it's because of her bad behavior that she breaks her bone.
Their voices became distant. Then I felt my head heat up and then cool down. I've reached my limit. I couldn't take it any longer. Do you think you can get away with treating me so roughly and saying such crazy things? I will get even. I decided and stood up, holding the plate with the garbage on it. But what would be the most effective way? I had no idea, since I had never tried to get back at anyone before. For now, gathering information, I guess, I began to investigate their weaknesses. By doing housework with my broken hand, I searched all over the house while my mother-in-law and Ben were out. I also hired a detective and began to investigate the two of them there. I thought it would be foolish to lose my savings from my bachelorette days by doing this. But if I was going to do it, I wanted to do it thoroughly. I recorded the terrible things that Ben and my mother-in-law had done to me, and waited patiently for the right moment. When my broken bones had almost completely healed, the time for payback came. One morning, my mother-in-law moved from her bedroom to the living room. My mother-in-law's bedroom was on the second floor, and the living room was on the first floor. Inevitably, she had to go down the stairs. She seems to sleep on the way down, and a terrible sound echoed through the house. My son and I rushed toward the stairs, but it was already too late. My mother-in-law was lying in a heap at the bottom of the stairs. We rushed to the hospital for treatment, where she was diagnosed with a broken ankle. My mother-in-law looked dejected and was muffled and silent. She would occasionally mutter, "Oh, it hurts." That night, when I was able to use both hands to my satisfaction, I put my skills to the test and prepared dinner. The whole family was at the table. It was a disaster, wasn't it? Mother, please cheer yourself up with delicious food. I smiled and put the food in front of my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law's face turned pale, clearly upset. What the hell? Stop harassing me! I'm injured! What I served as her supper was food scraps, banana peels, fish bones, coffee grounds, and various other garbage were mixed together and added on top. I decided to return the favor that my mother-in-law had done to me before. Harassment? I'm just serving food for the injured. My mother-in-law was trembling.
Stop it! Don't you dare mock my mother!
As I had expected, Ben also started to get angry. I put a plate in front of him as well. Of course, there was garbage on it. Garbage is good enough for a man who can't protect his wife as a husband. Ben's mouth was agape, and he couldn't say anything. I decided to take advantage of the opportunity to say what I wanted to say. Oh, you're so pale, Mom. You broke your bone. It's because you don't work hard enough. Well, I guess you break bones because you don't work hard enough. What do you think, Ben? That's exactly what he said to me when I broke my arm. You! Shut up and listen to me. Who do you think you are?
I don't want a daughter-in-law like you. Get your stuff together and get out of here. That's right, that's right. You're not fit to be my wife. Get out.
I did as I was told, packed my bags, and left home. I was willing to get a divorce. They wanted me to leave my son behind, but I adamantly refused. It would be bad for my son's upbringing if he stayed in a house like this. I decided to evacuate for the time being. A few days had passed since I left home. My own parents and my brother and sister-in-law were willing to accept me and my son. I was also grateful that my brother and his wife's children were willing to play with my son, since it was summer vacation. But what should we do now? As I was thinking about this, I suddenly remembered. I had left the apron my son had given me for Mother's Day at my parents-in-law's house. I could give up the other things, but not that one. I left my son with my parents and returned to my parents-in-law's house alone. It was a good opportunity to talk about the future. With this in mind, I drove to my in-laws' house. It took about an hour and a half on the highway. I arrived at my parents-in-law's house. I tried to stop the car, but another car had already been parked there. It was a car I had never seen before. Wondering, I decided to return to my in-laws' house after parking the car at the nearby toll parking lot. The front door was unlocked, so I quietly opened the door and went inside. There I found a pair of shoes belonging to a woman I did not realize. I wondered if a friend of my mother-in-law's was visiting. If so, I might not be able to have a deep conversation with her. I decided to just collect the apron and go home. With this in mind, I headed for the living room. When I opened the door, I saw my mother-in-law and Ben in the living room. Ahead of them, I saw a young woman wearing my precious apron and hurriedly cooking. When they noticed me, they all stood up and rattled their dishes in a panic. I, on the other hand, was extremely calm. You are Ben's mistress, aren't you? I know who you are. When I said this, the woman looked so surprised that she jumped up and said, How do you know? Yes, I knew Ben was cheating on me. I wanted to know why Ben, who had been so kind to me until then, had suddenly become so harsh. So I asked a detective agency to investigate. And there it was, the evidence of an affair. As I had expected, the timing of Ben's sudden cold shoulder coincided with the start of the affair. My mother-in-law probably asked or persuaded Ben to do it. She wanted him to be cold to me in order to get rid of me. It was a despicable way to go about it. I showed them the evidence I had saved on my phone, one by one. Then all three of them turned very pale. And Ben, for example, looked as if he was about to fall over. Ben must have realized that there was no excuse. He suddenly came up to me and took my hand.
I'm sorry, Lee, but you're the only one for me. You like me too, don't you? Well, I guess divorce is not an option. Let's just call it a double blowout. No alimony or anything, okay?
I stared coldly at Ben, who was trying to flirt with me, and shook his hand away. What? I don't even like you a little bit. In fact, I hate you. I will make sure you pay alimony and child support. And her too, of course. You'd better be ready for that, Mother. When I said that, my mother-in-law tried to come over to me in a panic. However, because of her broken bones, her leg became entangled and she fell down. She also seemed to have hit somewhere hard and was thrashing around on the floor. I don't know what she's doing. As I looked down at my mother-in-law, Ben's mistress finally came out of the kitchen and bowed to me. I'm sorry. Ben asked me out, and I just couldn't say no. I'm sorry, so please forgive me. The woman wiggled around in my precious apron. She is a nasty woman. I see. If you really want me to forgive you, Get down on your knees and apologize. Then I can think about whether to make you pay alimony. I told her in a cold voice. The woman made a disgruntled voice, saying, "What?" But Ben forced her to get down on her knees, and he got down on his knees next to her.
I'm sorry.
Ben looked up, his face expectant. I stared at him for a few seconds. Well, I've thought about it. I'm not going to forgive you. Just make sure you have alimony and child support ready. With her mouth agape, I took off the apron from her. Then I left my parents-in-law's house, leaving everyone in a daze. A month later, Ben and I were officially divorced. Of course, I had to file for alimony and child support, which was to be paid in a lump sum soon, with a lawyer in between. But I had plenty of evidence of cheating and harassment, so everything went smoothly. Ben, however, was having a hard time giving up on his son. He tried to appeal to his son himself to choose him, but it didn't work. Even though his son was in elementary school, he seems to sense an unpleasant atmosphere from Ben and my mother-in-law, and he told him that he wanted to stay with me. He still gets their occasional unsolicited message on his cell phone, but he completely ignores them. Ben and his mistress were having an affair within the same workplace, to my surprise, and they have been many messes since then. According to what I heard, the affair between Ben and the woman had spread throughout the company, and as a result, both had to resign from their jobs. Ben temporarily moved into the woman's place, but since he was unemployed and they both paid alimony to me, they were left living in poverty. The woman, who couldn't stand it any longer, ran off with another man, so they seems to have broken up. Ben returned to his mother's house, but his mother and Ben blame each other for the incident. In a sense, they are like mother and son. They will have to live a lonely life together. They deserve it. Meanwhile, I have started living with my son with the support of my family. I felt sorry for my son to be transferred from the school he had attended for 6 years. So I rented an apartment in the school district, where we had lived until this point, just for a few months until graduation. Recently, he has been able to settle down and get back to a more peaceful life. The other day, I went to an amusement park with my son for the first time in a long time, and he said to me, "Mom, I will protect you from now on." What a kind and gentle boy he is. I hugged my son, who looked embarrassed, and promised myself that I would protect him.